Big news today out of the Browns camp. We are joined now with ESPN Browns reporter Daniel Oyefusi. Thank you so much for joining us today. Listen, let's just get straight to it. Myles Garrett, he says he wants to get out of Cleveland. He's done with the team is what it's coming off like. He's been here for 8 years. He's only made the playoff twice. Is it fair to say that it makes sense why he wants to leave?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that had been percolating over the course of the season. We heard the comments that Myles Garrett made late in the season about not wanting to rebuild in Cleveland, wanting to speak with the higher-ups to really understand their offseason plans, especially at quarterback, before further committing to the organization. Like you said, this is a guy that's been here since 2017, the #1 overall pick, and he's really been on a losing team for the most of his tenure in Cleveland. 6 losing seasons, just 1 playoff win, and he's coming off the heels of a season that he said was even more disappointing than the 0-16 season when he was a rookie. So it does make sense that, he's had all the personal accolades, but he's talked about wanting to pair that with team success. And after these conversations with the Browns higher-ups, it seems like he doesn't believe he can find that in Cleveland.
And see, that's also what I wanted to talk about next, is the fact that he did say that he did not want to rebuild, but he was going to have these conversations with the upper management. So it seems like these conversations of whatever they told him of how this team is going to move forward or what they want to do is not something he was interested in hearing.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough spot for this regime right now where you're kind of trying to move past the Deshaun Watson trade in a way. He's dealing with this second Achilles tear. They thought that he would kind of be the player to vault this team to contention. That has not happened. Now you have the #2 overall pick. You're thinking about maybe taking a quarterback or maybe thinking about adding a quarterback in free agency. And there's just no way to just guarantee for sure to Myles that you're going to be competing and contending the way he would want in 2025. So it really is a tough spot for this organization with their franchise cornerstone.
Obviously, when Andrew Berry, the general manager of the team, wanted to bring Deshaun here, the hope was that we were going to see that Deshaun Watson that was at the Houston Texans. That has been the complete opposite of what the Browns have gotten, the fans have received. Do you understand, I guess, from Myles' point of view, why it's so frustrating? Because, I mean, there's no one to lead this offense moving forward. So it's kind of like everything is still going to rely on the defense, which puts a lot more pressure on him.
Yeah, he alluded to that in those comments that he made late in the season. He said, hey, for as much question and just uncertainty there is on the outside about the quarterback position, there was a lot of it on the inside. He said, hey, I don't know if it's going to be DTR, Jameis Winston, maybe Deshaun. We don't know who's going to start at quarterback. So, again, he believes that there is talent on this roster. He said that he thinks that this defense has the tools to get back to that #1 standing that we saw back when they made the playoffs a year ago. But as a whole, you're not going to go very far if you don't have answers at the quarterback position. And again, it's a tough spot for an organization that is trying to figure things out on the fly this offseason. So it makes for a very more interesting offseason than we expected.
And it's also interesting the way that he put the message out. Obviously, Pro Bowl week, they just wrapped things up with the Pro Bowl, so he made sure not to say anything because there would have been a lot of questions during those games surrounding the Browns and Myles and what he was going to do. And now you're doing it into leading to Super Bowl week, and he doesn't post it, but his representation, they send it out. And now it is a very, very public thing, and I'm sure that's not the way that the Browns wanted it to go.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, sources have said that they're remaining adamant that they do not intend to listen to trade offers, trade for him, but it does put a little bit of pressure, public pressure on the organization maybe in terms of keeping it internal. So this is something that could play out over the next couple months, over the next couple weeks. Obviously, we have free agency coming up next month. The draft is coming up. If they want to trade Myles, if they do decide to do that, I mean, they could get a really big return. We've seen in years past, when the Raiders traded Khalil Mack. I mean, they got 2 first-round picks and then some for sending him to the Bears. That's the type of draft, return that you can use to rebuild and replenish this roster. But in 2025, and what is kind of a make-or-break season for the organization, do you want to go into that season without Myles Garrett? That's what they're going to have to kind of look at.
And it's interesting that you bring up Khalil Mack because what did the Bears essentially do with Khalil Mack? Did they go to the Super Bowl, right? They weren't necessarily a contender. It seems like Myles wants to go to a team that is a contender for the Super Bowl. But when you get into the draft picks, how does that necessarily work? Because if you're looking at those contenders, they're not picking until the end of the draft, which is not that good of a pick. So what kind of deal could even be worked out if he were to go to a Super Bowl contending team?
And again, that's one of the things that you're looking at in a potential Myles Garrett trade is the number, I'm just throwing it out there, there's the number 23 overall pick this year and then another first-round pick from a contending team next year, maybe a couple of third-round picks. is that going to leave you in a better spot, for the 2025 season than you would have been with having Myles Garrett, the reigning Defensive Player of the Year, a finalist for the award again? Is that going to leave you in a better spot than if you had him on the roster again? It's a make or break offseason and season for this regime. Going into it without Myles Garrett, it kind of puts you already behind the 8 ball and trying to turn this thing around.
We know Myles to be a super cool, laid-back type of guy. He never gives the media any type of issue, and always really nice, right? But is this a player that maybe would have to put his foot down and say, okay, well, if you're not going to trade me, then I'm just not going to play?
Yeah, I mean, that's usually how it works. You put the trade request out there, then you kind of force the issue. Now, I will say the collective bargaining agreement kind of makes it tough for guys to hold out, to miss training camp, to miss these offseason workouts. You have these fines that you accrue if you decide not to show up. So again, we're still in the early parts of it. We'll see how it develops over the next couple weeks, couple months. But again, there are avenues to kind of force the issue if you want to.
Let's just say in a perfect world, and this is not a perfect world for Browns fans, outside of Browns fans, in a perfect world, what would be the best team that you could see Myles shine at and say, okay, this is a really good shot to get to the Super Bowl? I know we can say the 2 teams that are in the Super Bowl now, but I mean that you really see that he could fit into their defensive unit and really shine and take that team to the next level.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think earlier in the season, in the middle of the season, when there was some kind of trade rumors kind of floating around, some teams, a team that came up was the Detroit Lions. They were without Aiden Hutchinson, their star pass rusher. We already know that they already traded Zadarius Smith out there, so maybe a reunion with Z out in Detroit would make sense for a team that dealt with a lot of injuries this past season on the defensive front. Maybe a team like the Commanders that has a lot of cap space. It seems like whatever team does trade for Myles or whatever team would trade for Myles, I would have to give him a new deal because he's coming up toward the end of that extension he signed a couple years back. The Commanders have a lot of draft capital. They have a lot of cap space. They got a young, ascending quarterback in Jaden Daniels. That kind of makes sense, if you're Myles and you're looking to get to a contender.
All right, so the last question, most important question, do you think the Browns are actually going to trade Myles Garrett?
I'm going to say no. Just the nature of this being a make or break year. I keep on saying that, a make or break offseason and season for this regime. Just the nuances of the cap, where they take on a lot of dead cap space just to trade Myles away. And then just the fact that you're not going to be a better team in 2025 when you need to be. I don't know how this is resolved, if it's resolved. But I think that they're gonna try to stick it out with him and try to come to some type of resolution.
Well, going into the draft, going into OTAs, going into training camp, it is going to be a lot of things going on when you have the Deshaun Watson drama. We now have Myles Garrett drama. There is just so much going on with this Browns team. They may not be necessarily winning right now, but there is still a lot to talk about. Daniel, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you, and we're going to be seeing you soon.
Thanks for having me.